Call on Stephanie Antrick for her delegation, resident city of Thorold.
Well, hello, and thank you so much for having me here today. This is such an important matter. Really thankful for Councillor Houston for bringing this up. I'm really proud of her. As a woman, it's really hard amongst loud voices. You know, males don't tend to mean to be loud and dominant, but it's part of their traits as a male, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, there's a few of them on council, and I'm really proud of her for bringing this up. So this is an amazing thing for her to do.
I'll now call on Stephanie Antrick for her delegation,
I'm here.
resident city of Thorold.
Can you hear me? Well,
Yeah.
hello.
We've heard you begin. I don't know why it's being repeated, but we have heard your,
Really?
that's a technical thing happening. Please go ahead. We've heard what you've begun with, and you can continue.
Loud voices. You know, males don't tend to mean to be loud and dominant, but it's part of their traits as a male, and that's a good
Stephanie, you have to shut off the web stream that you have running in the background, please.
Okay, thank you. This is an amazing thing for her to do.
I'll now call on Stephanie Antrick for her.
There it is. Okay. I'm back. Thank you so much for that. I was wondering about what was going on
Thank you
there.
to the clerk for that help.
Okay, you can see me now and hear me.
Yes.
Okay, so proud of Councillor Houston, and that's where I am at. So I do just have a couple of things to say. I won't spend a lot of time. Thank you for hearing me. I just wanted to mention, so considering the OPP have stated that domestic violence has increased by 100% since COVID, and since Dr. Hergy has stated a few times in his health reports that mental health has increased due to COVID, which is no surprise, of course, and that more people will die of mental health related illnesses than of COVID. So that was in one of his reports. So this is such an important topic. So I support Councillor Houston's initiative here. And I just want to highlight two things that I think are important in order to, as the delegates that came before me had mentioned, the action part of it. So the raising the flag will bring the awareness, and part of the action is really important. So I feel one of the things that the council can do regarding an action is that idea of the media awareness. So the media is really freaking everybody out and scaring everybody from providing services and support, even just to their family members and loved ones. And so since Niagara has decided to fund media or to be involved in that in some regard, I think perhaps some encouragement for the media to present the data in a way that is more realistic and truthful to the respect that the actual severity for this population for any severe COVID is a lot less than what's happening to their mental illness and mental health. So I think that would be number one when we move to that action state, to get some proper media representation for this this problem that we have. So shelters and support services for women and victims of domestic violence should not have to enforce COVID measures. There should be a more emphasis placed on the mental and physical safety, since they are more likely, as Dr. Hergy noted, to suffer mental health and domestic abuse than any serious impact of COVID. And that's been a big limiting factor. So I only bring this up because I have a friend who has a child who was not accepted into a shelter because she wasn't vaccinated. So her mom freaked out because she found out that she ended up getting vaccinated, even though she was in a horrible state. She was on drugs. She was in a horrible mental condition. And the mother said that she was not in the proper state to make an informed consent about this experimental agent. This is what the mother's words were. So that idea of unbiased, indiscriminate services need to be available immediately for these women, because there's more of a chance that they're suffering mental health and mental health related death and illness and domestic violence than it will be that they're going to actually have any severe outcome from this COVID. So I think looking at what's the problem, as opposed to the problem in this population isn't necessarily that they might die of COVID. The problem in this population is more so that they're victims of domestic violence at an increase of 100%. So I just wanted to support that initiative from Councillor Houston. There's one more thing I wanted to hopefully advise to the council, and that is that we need to begin to look immediately on a mental health recovery plan that includes media representation, because people need to know where to access information regarding services. So currently, I know a lot of folks that are looking for shelters, and they're looking at that idea. They don't know what's open and what's not open, and they just assume they're not allowed to go anywhere or do anything. And that's causing them to stay with their husbands or their boyfriends, or staying in the abusive situations, or staying at the trap houses, or staying where they should not be staying because they don't know where else to go. So we need media on our side. But in order to do that, the media can't scare everybody and say, you're all going to die of COVID. We all know that that is just strongly overstated, regardless of whether, people are still afraid or not. When you look at the data states women of this population are more likely to have mental illness and death related to mental illness than death related to COVID. So we need to look at that data. And we also need to start providing those indiscriminate services for these women, which does not include coercing people to get any type of medical vaccinations in order to provide them services, because they're not in the proper mental state to say, yes, I'll take a vaccine or anything like that. And I just wanted to bring that up because I know that as a researcher at the university, I've taken research ethics board training. I know a lot about coercion and how it's illegal, it's against the law. You can't coerce people to do things. So I don't think that these mental health services should be coercing people to get vaccinated, get any number of things. I think they should just leave it alone for now and accept these people as is. Accept them to come in, and let's use the media to promote their services in the community. And that's all I really wanted to say. Thank you again, Councillor Houston, for bringing this up. I've been keeping up with some of the data regarding domestic violence as well. I have friends in the social services, and they work at social services places. We talk about it, and it's something that needs to be addressed, and I think more immediately than anything. So thank you again. That's all I have to say. I appreciate so much your time.
Thank you. As we proceed, I want to remind everyone that all remarks should be directed to the actual motion that has been presented by Councillor Houston. Next, we have presenting Daniel Romanuk, resident, City of St. Catharines. Ms. Romanuk. You may proceed, Ms. Romanuk.
Oh, sorry, I hadn't heard you. Good evening, everyone. As always, it's a pleasure to be here. I would like to start by thanking the Canadian Federation of University Women's Delegation for explaining so well that action is a necessary extension of awareness campaigns. And I'd also like to thank the woman who acts as Regional Councillor for Pelham, Diana Houston, for submitting this motion. Let's look at the first whereas statement. 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence is an annual international campaign running from November 25th through December 10th that calls on the prevention and elimination of violence against women and girls. In my opinion, this first whereas statement is enough to resolve to fly the flag for 16 days, 5 months from now. Of course, this is under the assumption that we can rely upon the United Nations to give us an honest perspective on matters. But is flying a flag an adequate resolution? I believe that Council can salvage the second whereas statement through to the fifth and final and make another motion to petition the province to declare an emergency, as these whereas statements seem to me to fit the criteria as set out in section 7.0.1, subsection 3 of the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. For clarity, I will read the criteria for declaration in section 7 of the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, followed by the second through fifth whereas statements, and you can decide for yourself if a resolution to fly a flag in November is the best we can do. The criteria for declaration. An order declaring that an emergency exists throughout Ontario or any part of it may be made under this section if, in the opinion of the Lieutenant Governor and Council or the Premier, as the case may be, the following criteria are satisfied. Number 1, there is an emergency that requires immediate action to prevent, reduce, or mitigate a danger of major proportions that could result in serious harm to persons or substantial damage to property. Number 2, one of the 3 following circumstances exists. Either the resources normally available to a ministry of the government of Ontario or an agency, board, or commission or other branch of the government, including existing legislation, cannot be relied upon without the risk of serious delay. 2, or if said resources are insufficiently effective to address the emergency. Or 3, it is not possible to ascertain whether said resources can be relied upon without the risk of serious delay. Now let's look at the remaining whereas statements. The second whereas. The pandemic has been linked to an alarming increase in rates of violence against women, domestic violence reporting, and domestic homicides, as well, and it's also known as a shadow pandemic. The third whereas. 1 in 3 women worldwide will experience physical or sexual violence, mostly by an intimate partner, and emerging data has shown that all types of violence against women and girls has intensified during the pandemic. The fourth whereas. The supply of women's shelter space has decreased due to public health measures, while simultaneously there has been a 30% increase in the rates of gender-based violence. Fifth and final whereas. Indigenous women and girls and racialized minority and vulnerable communities are more likely to be the victims of assault. I believe we can safely say that gender-based violence constitutes a danger of major proportions that in reality is causing harm to persons, and that the resources normally available cannot be relied upon and are insufficiently effective to address the emergency. And I implore you as a council to petition the province to declare a state of emergency in this area. On further reflection, just before the council meeting started, I would also like to say that the fifth and final whereas statement regarding Indigenous women and girls could be added to the ever-mounting evidence and cover-up of Canada's guilt and culpability in an ongoing genocide of Indigenous Turtle Islanders, as it seems to me to constitute its own declaration of emergency. Unless, of course, the province does have the resources to deal with the problem, but for some reason has failed to mobilize them, in which case I suggest there be a motion to petition that the resources be released post-haste. I see we have about 5 or 6 minutes left, and I'd like to dedicate my remaining time in silence to all those who will continue to suffer despite symbolic gestures.
Thank you for your delegation.
Excuse me, Chair Bradley, I said that I would like to dedicate the rest of my time in silence for those who are still suffering.
I'll turn to the clerk for guidance on this. Clerk.
If there's an objection to the silence, I will gladly take the time back and explain that I was part of an email chain that fell upon the deaf ears of the majority of the female counselors. Only 3 of them bothered to respond. So this showed me how powerful silence can be.
We are prepared to comply with your request for silence.
Wonderful.
Because you can use your time as you deem appropriate, and you have asked for that, and I've checked with the clerk, and she said it's appropriate to comply with your request. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your delegation. We will now move to the next delegate, Tanya Loeb, Jillian's Place.